Kinnison, the kind-hearted hunter from Suikoden 2. Very little of Kinnison's backstory was revealed in the game, except that he lives in the forest near Ryubei village and that he attempted to protect the forest from the destruction caused by the Highland Army during their march south. While the game revealed very little of his backstory was explored in a short story titled Poem of the Forest, which was included in the Genso Suikoden Short Story Collection 3, a book that released in Japan in December 2001, 3 years after the game released. This short story covered Kinnison's childhood and how he met Shirou. In this video, I'll be providing a summary of that short story. As a child, Kinnison was raised by his mother and had no memories of who his father was. His mother passed away when he was around 10 years old, and he would then be taken in by his uncle Ashino, who was his mother's older brother. Ashino was a hunter who lived in Ryubei Forest along with his dog Kana, and he made a living selling the pelts of animals he hunted for food. Ashino had great respect for the forest and never hunted more than he needed to survive, as he was concerned about people from the nearby villages overhunting. Living in a forest was like a whole new world for Kinnison, as the village he was born and raised in was in the middle of a grassy plain and he had never seen a forest before. Kinnison was afraid of the forest, fearing that if he ventured too deep, he'd get eaten by a wild beast. 6 months after moving in with Ashino, a storm hit the forest with fierce winds and heavy rain. The winds were so strong that Kinnison was unable to sleep, fearing that the house was going to be blown away in the storm. The storm passed by dawn, and then Ashino and Kana would head out to explore the forest as the storm had done significant damage. Kinnison, who was afraid to be alone in a secluded house in the woods he was so scared of, quickly followed after them. Shortly after catching up to them, Kinnison heard a faint sound coming from a build-up of branches and grass from a nearby stream. On closer inspection, he found a whimpering puppy crying beside and clinging onto the body of a dog. The storm during the night had broken a branch off a nearby tree, which killed the mother. The sound of the puppy's cries caused Kinnison's chest to hurt, as it reminded him of how he cried when his own mother died. Kinnison and Kana would both run to help the pup while Ashino buried the mother's body. Kinnison carried the pup home, filling a dish with milk and offering it some meat, but the frightened pup refused to eat as it growled and backed away from Kinnison. Kinnison turned to Ashino for advice, who told him that mother dogs chew the meat to feed to their pups, and without a second thought, Kinnison began chewing the raw bloody meat for the pup. Kinnison then grabbed the pup, trying to forcefully open its mouth so that he could feed him. The pup initially tensed up and resisted, biting Kinnison's hand, but soon relaxed upon realizing it was being fed. The pup began to warm up to Kinnison after being fed, no longer growling at him or running away from him, but would still go wild when being picked up and held. Ashino then informed Kinnison not to chew on raw meat again, as it's not good for the human stomach, and he then prepared some medicine for Kinnison. Kinnison then grabbed a cloth and washed the dirt off the pup, his dirty greyish fur now pure white, and Ashino would remark that he appears to be a wolf dog. Later that night, Kinnison named the pup Shiro and made a bed for him next to his own, where the exhausted pup would sleep all night. The next morning, Kinnison began teaching Shirou. The two would play fetch together, explore the forest together, and sleep next to each other. Shirou soon grew tired of playing fetch, and instead of returning the stick to Kinnison, he would sprint off into the forest and force Kinnison to chase after him. One day while playing, Shirou ran off into the forest with Kinnison chasing after him, but Kinnison lost sight of him and began to panic, calling out his name. Suddenly, Shirou leapt from behind a tree, knocking Kinnison over. The grasshopper then flew out of a nearby bush, crossing Kinnison's face. Shirou would then leap at the grasshopper, but missed and landed on Kinnison's stomach. Kinnison then began petting Shirou as the two laid beside each other, staring up at the sky and listening to the birds chirp. But then Kinnison felt a kick in his stomach as Shirou jumped up to chase a butterfly. Kinnison started to laugh, and then he realized, for the first time since he moved in with his uncle, he was no longer afraid of the forest. Shortly after this, Ashino would then begin teaching Kinnison about the ways of the forest, teaching him how to hunt, how to track, and how to use a bow and arrow. Sometime later, Ashino and Kinnison would travel to a nearby village along with Kana and Shiro to sell the fur of the animals they had hunted. Normally, Kinnison enjoyed travelling to the nearby villages as visiting the markets reminded him of the village he grew up in with his mother. But lately the markets have bored him and he'd much rather be at home playing with Shiro or practicing with his bow. While Kinnison was bored and wanted to go home, Shiro was excited. It was Shiro's first time in a village and he wanted to explore, but he knew not to stray too far from Kinnison. A man soon approached Kinnison, curious about Shiro's white fur. He began quizzing Kinnison about Shiro, asking if he's a white wolf pup. Kinnison, who was feeling nervous, grabbed Shiro tightly and lied, saying that Shiro was Kana's pup. The man then started asking Kinnison about white wolves and if he'd ever seen one in the forest. Ashino wrapped up his business and a relieved Kinnison rushed to his side. Ashino could tell that something was bothering Kinnison as Kinnison wanted to leave the village as soon as possible, and on their way home, Kinnison asked Ashino if he'd ever seen a white wolf before. Ashino replied that while he'd never seen a white wolf, legend has it that a white wolf does reside in the forest. One day while exploring the forest, Shiro spotted a hare, but the hare just stood there frozen, staring back at him. Kinnison noticed that its legs were tied together and it was unable to move. As Kinnison tried to get closer, Shiro gently bit his leg to stop him. Kinnison then noticed that the soil by his right foot was unusually soft. Kinnison then kicked away the leaves and branches with his foot before applying a small amount of pressure. As he pressed his foot into the ground, a hole opened in the ground to reveal a spike pit trap. Someone had dug the hole and built the trap, using the hare as bait to lure in a larger animal. Kinnison filled the hole with as much soil as he could before freeing the hare, and from that day on, Kinnison would spend his trips into the forest searching for traps to break and spike pits to fill with soil. A few days later, as he was filling a hole in the ground, Kinnison was suddenly shoved to the ground. It was the man from the village who had quizzed him about white wolves. He began yelling at Kinnison, accusing him of ruining his hunts. Kinnison began shouting back at the man, insisting that nobody should set such traps as someone could fall in and get hurt, or that they could kill a pregnant animal. The hunter seemed amused by Kinnison's comments. He didn't care what he hurt or how many animals he killed as long as he caught the legendary white wolf and claimed the fame and fortune that came along with it. As Kinnison stood up, the hunter would then kick him so hard that it knocked Kinnison back onto the ground. But as the hunter readied a second kick, Shiro bit his leg. The hunter began screaming in agony before he was able to kick Shiro away. As the hunter tried to kick Shiro a second time, Kinnison threw himself in front of Shiro, using his own body as a shield to protect Shiro from the blow. The hunter started laughing as he grabbed Kinnison by the collar, tauntingly asking him, "How are you going to stop me?" The hunter eventually let go of Kinnison when Kana arrived baring her fangs at him, as Ashino approached from behind with his bow and arrow aimed at his leg. The now frightened hunter tried to defend his actions by telling Ashino that this brat ruined my traps. Ashino spotted the half-filled trap and would then aim his arrow at the hunter's chest, who then ran away scared. Ashino then checked on Kinnison, making sure that he was okay. Kinnison then declared that he was going to be just like his uncle when he grows up, as he wished to protect the forest from people like that hunter. After making sure that Kinnison was okay, Ashino headed home and told Kinnison to be home by nightfall. As they walked away, Kinnison noticed that Shiro was staring at something in the distance. It was the legendary white wolf. Shiro and the wolf stood like statues and stared at each other for a long time. Kinnison realized that this wolf was Shiro's father and tried to encourage Shiro to go with him. But Shiro refused, choosing to stay by Kinnison's side. The white wolf then vanished into the depths of the forest as Kinnison and Shiro headed home. Some years after the events of this short story, Ashino, having taught Kinnison everything he knew, would set out on a journey with his dog Kana, and this would be the last time that Kinnison would ever see them. Kinnison and Shiro would then continue living in Ryubei Forest until the events of Suikoden 2. And that's it for Kinnison's backstory. As I mentioned at the beginning, this backstory came from a short story titled Poem of the Forest from the Genso Suikoden Short Story Collection 3 that released in Japan in 2001. As always, do keep in mind that the games, the manga, the novels, the short stories, the anime, and everything else are all separate entities that are written by different authors. The backstory told in this short story is technically not canon to the game, but unless Kinnison makes another appearance in a future game, and that game contradicts the information in this short story, we can safely treat this as his canon backstory. If you like these shorter, stripped down videos covering topics which very little lore exists on, let me know in the comments and I'll make more of them. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll catch you on the next one.